I'd like to offer a deficit reduction thought and idea. You know, these lands, particularly BLM, were at one time under the government land office, and its role was disposal. We're at a point in time today, you know, with our deficits running like they are, that we ought to be taking a look at what can the private sector do help with the national treasuries, and start looking at ways to put these things in private ownership. And I know that gets to be a lightning rod thing, but let me say it. I think it ought to be considered if we really are serious about it.
Well, wouldn't that require reversal of FLTMA? Because FLTMA changed the Federal Lands Management Policy Act, changed the role from disposal to retention.
Any of those things can be repealed. It just takes a good, thoughtful approach to what we want to do in the future. I'm not, you know, opposed to protection. I like national parks. I like preserving old buildings, but it doesn't need to be right out my back door with all the lands that are out back there. So,
you know, one twist to what Jim said might be that our state and local governments, we're closest to those lands. We care about those lands like nobody else. You know, if we had more of a say in how those lands were managed, you know, whether that's I don't know whether that's a jurisdictional change or just a return to the original principles of FLTMA. The only way they really sold FLTMA in 1976, Chad, the only way they got enough votes from Western congressmen to go from a disposal model to a retention model is they put a promise in FLTMA. And the promise was federal land management plans on BLM lands will be consistent with state and local plans to the maximum extent consistent with federal law.
That's right.
That promise has, it exists more in the, as a rare exception than as the rule that it's supposed to be. If we could get back to let's let the values and the expertise and the desired outcomes that local governments have, let's go back to the spirit and letter of FLTMA and let those drive how resource management plans. We tried to do that in the 2008 RMPs. We had somewhat we had success in that. Not as much as we'd like, but again, the problem with the Salazar order, it says, basically it's a top-down edict that says nothing about what local governments want, it says nothing about local plans and values. It just creates this de facto default position, and so
that must be considered as part of the process. Is that
right?
I mean,
well,
that's basically the nuts and bolts, that when you're considering any tract of public land for planning purposes, you have to put equal status on wilderness protection with all other multiple uses. Is that?
At least that. That's at least what it calls for. We're afraid it may call for even a stronger default wilderness position. The language is there to pave the way for them to really have a strong mandate to take all of these proposed wilderness lands and preserve them. We're going to have to duke it out and find out how it all shakes out. But
we've seen this before in Department of Agriculture, Forest Service. Wilderness area review and evaluation, Rare 1, Rare 2, and the current wilderness debate. The same thing's taking place on the National Forest System. And it's, you know, there's going to be another debate about whether it's going to overcome that Wyoming decision or not, but it's all going to just gridlock the place. And literally, our country can't afford that.
So Jim has a point. When it's easy to get frustrated about how we pulled anchor on what FLTMA was supposed to do, and that does create, when you see that the BLM and Forest Service are not honoring that consistency requirement, it does create these kinds of discussions about, well, is the retention model even working? And it does create discussions of maybe we ought to go back to some kind of a disposal model, or at least some major overhaul of the retention model to give more value to local input.
I'm just checking with you, Doug, because I think you've got some thoughts.
I've got some thoughts brewing. I don't know whether you have time for them.
This is internet. We've got time.
But what I wanted to just kind of bring out is the concept of responsible stewardship. I've lived on the land down there all of my life, and I've come to know the earth as an extremely resilient place. I'm a creationist, okay? I believe that this was placed here for the benefit and use of man. And if you look at it from that perspective, and I'm just going to share with you what I shared with Warren Palma just this last week. The earth is like a garden. You can let it go to weeds, or you can discipline it to production. Either way you want. And I'm going to take one of the, this is going to really offend some, but I consider perhaps the greatest enemy of our environment to be the really radical environmentalist. And the reason I'm saying that is this, and just follow through with me on this. Take, for example, Cedar Mountain, okay? The forest, Mother Nature is not a really good housekeeper. She manages by crisis. It's always one way or the other way. And a forest, as it begins to mature, a young forest is a beautiful thing. As it begins to mature, there comes a time when the tree, the forest, begins to ripen. If man does not intervene, then those trees, as they get old, they die, they stand for a while, and then they fall. And they begin to fall, and they fall, and they fall, and pretty soon the deadfall builds up, okay? So now we have a stand of deadfall in here, and as the forest grows older and older, eventually somebody's going to harvest the forest. Either mankind will will harvest it, or Mother Nature will harvest it. If Mother Nature harvests it, because of the fuel deadfall that we have in there, as that fire, the lightning fire usually, and it starts and it sweeps through the forest, it scorches the earth because of the extreme heat that's generated by that intense buildup. As the forest ages, it really isn't good for animals. The big animals just have a struggle in there. They walk through, you got deadfall 3 or 4 feet deep, they can't get through it, and they don't like it there. It gets really crowded in the top, the grass dies out. It becomes sort of a virgin forest in the true sense of the word. Isn't really a beautiful place. There's these conjures, you know, we conjure up these images of the virgin forest and all that stuff, but a ripened virgin forest really isn't all that pleasant place to be. As Mother Nature harvests the forest, what we find then is Mother Nature has to start over. And it would take 100, 200, 300 years to regenerate what was just lost.
Yellowstone.
Okay, right, exactly. Okay, Cedar Mountain is, and here's where my concern enters in. And on Cedar Mountain, we had probably one of the best Engelmann spruce forests in the world. Beautiful thing, and the Forest Service was doing a remarkable job of maintaining the vitality and the youth of the forest. They would mark those sections. They'd mark specific trees that needed to go, and during the harvest process, we clean out all the deadfall. Okay. The deadfall is now cleaned out. The spacing of the trees is opened up. The forest canopy is opened up just a little bit through the harvest process. The sun continues to shine. New trees begin to grow, and the grass grows. Animals do great. They love it there. They got everything they need. Mankind has benefited from the process because we use the resources from the forest. And that forest can virtually stay that way forever. Okay? It can continue in its youthful state indefinitely.
I mean, it is the ultimate in renewable, I suppose.
It is, and it blesses everybody involved. The animals are happy, the humans are happy, the forest is happy, the forest stays young because the forest is treated and disciplined to production. It works for everybody.
See, there's no room for that, for what Doug's talking about. There's no room for that in a wilderness ethic.
There is none.